What's poppin' pre-meds? More Anki flashcards, of course. I don't know which one to do. It's so many. I want to hit new ones today. That's for sure. Let's do. I'm gonna start chapter 2, chapter 4, chapter 5. Now, I want to hit some of the biology ones for sure. So after the biology ones, I'll start hitting definitely chem, and that should be good. And probably want to tackle psychology too. This one might take a while, by the way. Haploid cells mean that these cells have half the chromosomes, so N. GRNH is pretty controlled up until puberty, where it then gets released in big amounts in terms of waves. Which leads... Yeah, I got the gist of it. What is the structure and function of the corona radiata? I think it surrounds the follicle. Oocyte. Layer of cells that adheres to the oocyte during ovulation, and these are cells that are the first to be penetrated by sperm and responsible for communicating to the secondary oocyte that it's time to finish meiosis 2. Production of mature ovum and a polar body. That's a lot to take in. Layer of cells that adheres to the oocyte during ovulation and first be penetrated by the sperm and are responsible for communicating to the secondary oocyte. First penetrated by the sperm communicates to the secondary oocyte. That's time to finish meiosis 2. Production of a mature ovum and a polar. Okay, so layer of cells that adheres to the oocyte during ovulation, and is the first site where sperm penetrates, where it will tell the secondary oocyte to finish meiosis 2. Okay. And this results in the production of a mature ovum and a polar body. Mitosis is the division of cells, so 2 and 2 resulting in 2 identical daughter cells. Carrier in context of genetics means it has the bad allele, so heterozygote. Biological sex is determined by X or Y, so XX is female, XY is male. During the S stage, DNA gets replicated, so DNA replication occurs, formation of 2 sister chromatids. GnRH, gonadotropinin releasing hormone or something? Gonadotropinin releasing hormone. It's a hypothalamic hormone. When synthesized and released, it stimulates the... What does it stimulate? It stimulates the follicle stimulating hormone, FSH and LH, by the anterior pituitary. GnRH, gonadotropin releasing hormone, is a hypothalamic hormone. It's secreted from the hypothalamus, and it will stimulate the release of FSH and LH by the anterior pituitary. Timeline of menstruation, no idea. So day 1 through 14, shedding of the previous endometrium and follicular phase. Day 14 the LH spike and ovulation. Day 14 to the 28 the luteal phase. Day 1 through 8, shedding of previous endometrium and follicular phase. Day 14 LH spike and ovulation. Day 14 to 28 is luteal phase. Day 14 LH spike, ovulation of the previous endometrium and follicular phase. Okay. Corona radius is a layer of cells that surrounds the secondary oocyte, and when it's the first layer of cell that the sperm penetrates, and when it does penetrate, it signals to the secondary oocyte to finish meiosis 2. And it results in a mature ovum and a polar body. Progesterone contributes to the development and maintenance of the endometrium, but not its original thickening as estrogen. Progesterone contributes to the development and maintenance of the endometrium, but not its original thickening. Contributes to the development and maintenance of the endometrium, but not its original thickening. Gonadotropin releasing hormone is a hypothalamic hormone, so it's secreted from the hypothalamus, which then signals the anterior pituitary to release LH and FSH. Endometrium is a lining of some sort, inner lining of the uterus. Oh crap! I put 2. Oh well. Which hormone is responsible for secondary sex characteristics in women? Progesterone, estrogen. What is the basic time of menstruation? Day 0 to 14 is the previous endometrium lining disintegrates and the follicular phase ends. Day 14 is when you have an LH spike and LH spike day 14 to 28 is luteal phase. LH spike in ovulation day 14. Follicular phase day 1 to 14. Menstruation stage of menstruation. If no implantation occurs, the level of LH will fall. This causes the corpus luteum to cease production of progesterone, which weakens the integrity of the uterine lining and causes it to slow off. When estrogen level to block GnRH and cycle begin. That's a lot of information. If no implantation occurs, the level of LH will fall. If no implantation occurs, the level of LH will fall. This causes the corpus luteum to cease production of progesterone. To cease production of progesterone, which weakens the integrity of the uterine lining and causes it to slow off. With the estrogen and progesterone levels low again, the block on it. Holy moly. If no implantation occurs, the levels of LH will fall. And if the levels of LH fall, this causes a corpus luteum to cease production of progesterone, which weakens the integrity of the uterine line because it needs progesterone and causes it to slow off. With the block on end, okay, I kind of get it. You have no implantation. The main cause of it is that luteinizing hormone will fall. And because luteinizing hormones fall, this causes corpus luteum to cease production of progesterone, which weakens the uterine lining and causes it to also slow off. And because the estrogen and progesterone levels are low again, the block on GnRH is lifted and the cycle can begin again. Function of progesterone. Progesterone, again, it maintains the uterine lining, which is the endometrium. Okay. Which hormone is responsible for secondary estrogens for secondary sex characteristics? Menstruation. We have day 0 to 14, the endometrium lining disintegrates and the follicular phase begins. Day 14, LH spike and ovulation. Day 14 to 28 is called the day 14 to 28 luteal phase. That's menstruation. Primary sex characteristics. The sex organs you were born with during fetal development. Sex organs. Two function of the endometrium. Keeps adjacent walls of the uterus from sticking together, thereby maintaining its patency. Adjacent walls of the uterus together during menstruation goes into a thick blood vessel-rich tissue that can optimally support a blastocyst in the case of implantation. Okay, so in menstruation, the endometrium grows to become this thick blood vessel-rich tissue that can support a blastocyst in the case of implantation. And if it's not, then the thickened endometrium will begin to slow because there's no more progesterone. And in regular, endometrium keeps the walls of the uterus from sticking together. And also, during menstruation, grows into a thick blood vessels that can optimally support a blastocyst in uterus implantation. Okay. What happens in the menstruation stage of menstruation? Okay. If no implantation occurs, level of LH will fall. This causes a corpus luteum to cease production of progesterone, which weakens the integrity of the endometrium and causes it to slow off also. And because there's a decrease in estrogen and progesterone, the block on GnRH is lifted and the cycle can begin again. Progesterone maintains the endometrium, maintains thickening, but it doesn't contribute to its initial thickening. Primary sex characteristics are the sex organs you were born with. Adaptation. Way new information. I don't remember where this came from. Adaptation is a new way information altering. Didn't know that. If DNA is found to be due to damage to move past the G and G1 and S, how come there's a mixture of chapter 3 stuff? I don't know. If DNA is found to be too damaged to move past the G1S restriction point, what happens? It goes into G0 phase. Oh, okay. The cell cycle will be stopped by a protein known as P53, and an attempt will be made to repair the DNA so it can pass the restriction point. The cell cycle will be stopped by a protein known as P53, and an attempt will be made to repair the DNA so it can pass the restriction point. Okay. P53 will stop it and try to repair the DNA. So we're going to pass the restriction point. Okay. Two function of the endometrium. It serves as a wall for the uterine lining to prevent the uterus from clumping together. And the second function of endometrium is that it serves as a during ovulation, the endometrium lining can become a thick blood vessel, a rich and thick blood vessel that can support a blastocyst in the case of implantation during menstruation. What happens in a menstruation? So in menstruation stage of LH begins, or what was it? I don't know what the first part is. Levels of LH will fall if there's no implantation. Because levels of LH will fall, this causes corpus luteum to stop secreting progesterone. Because no progesterone endometrium lining disintegrates, and because the estrogen progesterone levels are low again, this allows GnRH to start being produced, which starts a whole cycle. Adaptation is the way we fit a schema to our understanding. How new information alternates schema. If DNA is found to be too damaged to move past the G1S restriction point, what happens? If it's too damaged to move back to the G1S restriction point, P53, a gene, will tell the cell to halts the cell cycle, where it can then check for the DNA damage and repair it if necessary, and allows it to either stop the stuff from going on or allows it to go on. GnRH is pretty constant throughout our entire lifetime until puberty, where it begins to be secreted in waves. Haploid means half the chromosome, so 23N. What is the blastocyst? The blastocyst is the developed zygote with a large fluid-filled cavity has undergone several rounds of replications ready to be implanted into the endometrium. Developed zygote with large fluid-filled cavity after having gone under several rounds of replications ready to be implanted into the endometrium. During the menstruation stage, so if no implantation occurs, levels of LH will begin to decrease. And this causes the corpus luteum to stop producing progesterone. And because we no longer have progesterone, the uterine wall, which is the endometrium, starts to disintegrate. And yeah, that's pretty much it. Oh, and because the progesterone levels are low again, the block on GnRH is lifted, and GnRH production can begin. Adaptation is the way we modify our current schemas for new information. Mendel's second law of genetics, law of independent assortment, is meiosis 2. Crossing over in prophase 1 allows genetic information to be traded between homologous chromosomes, which allows for unlinking of linked genes and the independent assortment. Prophase 1, the meiosis 1. A blastocyst is a fully developed zygote with a fluid-filled cavity, and it can be attached to the endometrium lining, where then, yeah. What molecule is responsible for timing of the cell cycle? Cyclin and cyclin-dependent kinases. What are the 4 stages of menstruation? Follicular phase, ovulation, luteal phase, menstruation itself. Follicular phase, ovulation, luteal phase, menstruation. Transcription factor. These are proteins, or any molecule actually, that assist in production of RNA. Yeah. What is the structure function of the corona radius? It's a layer of cells surrounding the secondary oocyte, and it's the first part that the sperm hits. And once the sperm hits the corona radii, it tells the secondary oocyte to finish meiosis 2, where it can then produce a mature ovum and polar bodies. What stage of meiosis? So second law of genetics is law of independent assortment, or the unlinking of linked genes, and this is during prophase 1 of meiosis 1. Ovulation, no idea. Process by which a follicle bursts and secondary oocytes are released into the abnormal cavity and taken up by the fallopian tube. Ovulation is the process by which a follicle bursts and a secondary oocyte is released. So a follicle bursting and a secondary oocyte is released into the abdominal cavity and taken up by the fallopian tube. Ovulation is a process by which a follicle bursts and a secondary oocyte is released into the abdominal cavity and taken up by the fallopian tube. Which molecules are responsible for the timing of the cell? Cyclin kinases and cyclin-dependent kinases? Cyclins and cyclin-dependent kinases. 4 stages of menstruation. We have ovulation, luteal phase, then menstruation itself, ovulation, follicular phase, ovulation, 3 luteal phase, menstruation. Follicular phase, ovulation, luteal phase, menstruation. The corpus luteum. What is the corpus luteum? After an egg bursts from a follicle, the burst follicle will turn into a corpus luteum. The corpus produces progesterone in response to luteinizing hormone. Okay. I see how it's regulated now. So once the egg bursts from the follicle lining itself will turn to something called the corpus luteum. And the corpus luteum's job is to produce progesterone to keep the endometrium lining in response to luteinizing hormone. Gonadotropin releasing hormones secreted from the hypothalamus, where it makes its way to the anterior pituitary to cause the release of FSH and LH. Endometrium. Inner lining of the uterus. I knew that. What is ovulation? Ovulation is the process by which follicles burst and the secondary oocyte is released into the abdominal cavity, where it's taken up by the fallopian tube. Which molecules are responsible for the timing of the cell cycle? Cyclin and cyclin-dependent kinases. Secondary sex characteristic is estrogen. 4 stages of menstruation is the follicular phase, ovulation, luteal phase, menstruation. Who is Jean Piaget? There's some psych in here. I see, that's why it's longer. Whatever. Was one of the most influential figures in developmental psychology. He proposed how children cognitively develop over time. What is the basic timeline of menstruation? There's some repeats in here. Interesting. Day 1 through 14 is the... I thought the other one was... Whatever. Day 1 to 14 is the shedding of the previous endometrium and follicular phase. Day 14 is an LH spike and ovulation. Day 14 to 28 is a luteal phase. Corpus luteum is formed. So when egg bursts out of follicle, the burst follicle turns into a corpus luteum, which job is to generate progesterone in response to luteinizing hormone. Endometrium is the inner lining of the uterus. Ovulation is when I think ovulation is when an egg bursts out of the follicle. A follicle bursts and a secondary oocyte is released into the abdominal cavity, which is taken by the fallopian tube. So we have a follicle, it bursts, the secondary oocyte comes out and goes to the abdominal cavity, where it gets taken up by the fallopian tube. Jean Piaget was a famous psychologist who basically researched on how children develop over time. Primary sex characteristic revolves around the organs you have from birth. A follicle are multi-layered sacs that contain, nourish, and protect ova, which are the eggs. The follicle are multi-layered sacs that contain, nourish, and protect immature ova. Immature. What is the function of progesterone? Progesterone maintains the endometrium lining. Yeah, it maintains the thickening of the endometrium lining, but it's not responsible for the initial thickening of the endometrium. Basic timeline of menstruation. So day 1 to 0 to 14, endometrium wall collapse, and the follicular phase begins. Day 14, you have the LH spike and ovulation, and day 14 through 28 is called the luteal phase. Ovulation. Ovulation is when the follicle bursts and the secondary oocyte gets transported into the abdominal cavity and taken up by the fallopian tube. 5 important things happen in prophase. Chromatin. Yeah, there's some repeats in here. This might be a merged deck. Let me just double check real quick if this is a merged deck. Yeah, there's some similarities between 3 and 2, which is why it's a little bit confusing. What is a follicle? Follicle is a multi-layered sac that protects the ova, immature ova. What are the 5 important things that happens in prophase? Chromatin condenses into chromosome. Centrioles migrate to opposite sides of the cell. Centrioles begin to form spindle fibers, and spindle fibers ascend throughout the cell. The nucleus dissolves into kinetochores, and kinetochores appear in the centrosome. Okay, let me see here. Chromatin condenses to chromosome. Centrioles begin to migrate. Centrioles start to form spindle fibers, and spindle fibers begin to extend throughout the cell, mostly going towards the middle. And the nucleus dissolves and the kinetochore appears at the centromere. Okay. 2 function of endometrium. First, separate the lining of the uterus prevent them from bundling together. Second most important function of endometrium is that it serves basically during menstruation. It becomes a really thick, rich blood vessel that's able to nourish the blastocyte from development. And yeah. Describe eukaryotic chromosomes. Large pieces of DNA that, I think these are combined, which is interesting. Eukaryotic DNAs are large pieces of DNA that are formed from wrapping of DNA around histones and the packaging of those histones into a linear structure. Eukaryotic chromosomes are a large piece of DNA that are formed from the wrapping of DNA around histone and the packing of those histones into a linear structure. Large pieces of DNA that are formed from wrapping DNA around histone. Eukaryotic chromosome, large piece of DNA found wrapping DNA around histones. Okay, so eukaryotic contains histones, basically. 5 most important things from prophase. Centrioles separate. It's beginning to start spindle fibers. Spindle fibers starts to migrate to the middle. Chromatin condenses into chromosomes. Nucleus begins to disintegrate. Meiosis occurs in gametocytes. That's pretty easy. Why can't crossing over between sister chromatids? I don't know why it can't. I mean, if it did, yeah. Okay, that's not really a helpful card. If DNA is found to be too damaged to move past the G1S restriction point, we have a P53 protein that basically stops the cell at the G1S restriction point if DNA is damaged. And if it's a minor damage, it can fix it up and tell the cell to move on to the cell cycle. If it's a major damage, it'll tell it to stop dividing. What happens in the menstruation stage of menstruation? So during the menstruation phase, this is when, if no implantation occurs, levels of LH will fall. And because levels of LH will fall, the corpus luteum will begin to disintegrate, which causes level of progesterone to fall, which causes the endometrium line to become disintegrated. And this only occurs if no implantation occurs. Oh, and because the levels of progesterone and estrogen are decreasing, this allows the levels of GnRH to increase. Okay. Eukaryotic chromosomes they contain histones. Blastocyst is the zygote with the inner fluid-filled cavity, and it will eventually make its way into the endometrium. What occurs in ovulation? So in ovulation, a follicle will burst, and the secondary oocyte will make its way into the abdominal cavity where it's taken up by the fallopian tube. Oh, okay. Developing follicle releases estrogen. And as the follicles grow, so they release lots of estrogen because it negatively inhibits the hypothalamus. The fuck? Huh? I don't get it. Developing follicles release estrogen. And as the follicles grow, they eventually get so big that they are releasing lots of estrogen. Estrogen is interesting because it negatively inhibits the hypothalamus at low concentration. But after a certain concentration, it will conduct positive feedback on the hypothalamus. Developing follicles release estrogen. As the follicles grow, they eventually get so big they are releasing lots of estrogen. Estrogen is interesting because it negatively inhibits the hypothalamus. Estrogen is interesting because it negatively inhibits the hypothalamus at low concentrations. But after a certain concentration, it will conduct positive feedback on the hypothalamus. This increase in GnRH by the hypothalamus leads to a spike in FSH and LH levels. And the spike in LH is what actually induces ovulation. That's confusing. How we learn information by modifying our schemas. Second law of genetics, law of independent assortments. Unlinking genes, or the splitting of linked genes together, is due to prophase 1 of metaphase 1. Or prophase 1 of meiosis 1. Just crossing over. What is a transcription factor? These are molecules that help out with or inhibit or activate transcription. Secondary sex characteristics. Physical changes. It's a consequent problem at puberty. Physical changes at puberty, basically. What is an acrosome? Acrosome is a cap of a sperm head that allows it to penetrate the egg, derived from the Golgi apparatus. The acrosome is a cap on the sperm head that allows sperm to penetrate egg, and it's derived from the Golgi apparatus. Okay. Acrosome is a cap on the sperm head that allows it to penetrate the egg. Okay. What occurs in ovulation? In ovulation, the follicles keep getting bigger, which allows it to secrete estrogen. And it gets to a point where it gets so big that it secretes a lot of estrogen. And estrogen is very interesting because at very low concentration, it actually negatively inhibits like hypothalamus. But at certain concentration, it begins to do positive feedback on the hypothalamus, and causing the hypothalamus to secrete lots of GnRH, which in turn allows there to be a spike in LH and FSH. And the spike in LH is what actually induces ovulation. Four stages of menstruation. We have the follicular phase, ovulation, luteal phase, and menstruation itself. Secondary sex characteristics are the physical changes we see with puberty. A spermatid. Oh, this is sperm development. Spermatid is a secondary spermatocyte that has undergone second round of meiosis to result in one single strand copy of chromosome. Spermatid. Secondary spermatocyte that has undergone, basically product of meiosis too, basically. Yeah, product of meiosis 2 is a spermatid. Acrosome is the head of a sperm and allows it to penetrate a cell. It's made from the Golgi apparatus. Corpus luteum is basically it's what is formed after the follicle bursts and releasing the secondary oocyte. The burst follicle will form the corpus luteum, and its function is to produce progesterone in response to luteinizing hormone. Timing of the cell is cyclin and cyclin-dependent kinases. 3 tissues contribute to seminal fluid. What do they contribute? I know Cowper's gland is in there. Seminal vesicle produces fructose to nourish the cell and alkali products to protect the cell from the acidic female reproductive tract. The prostate gland makes more alkali products to further protect the sperm in the acidic female reproductive tract. And the bulbourethral Cowper's gland produces a clear viscous liquid that cleans out remnants of urine and lubricates the urethra during sexual arousal. Oh man, that's so much information. Seminal vesicle contributes fructose to nourish sperm and alkali products to protect the sperm. Prostate gland makes more alkali products to protect the sperm in the acidic female reproductive tract. Produce fructose, so seminal vesicle produces to nourish the sperm, alkali to protect. Prostate gland, alkali to protect. Cowper's gland, fluid that cleans out the urine and lubricates the urethra during sexual arousal. What is the endometrium? It's the inner lining of the uterus. Stanford psychologists who study kids and how they develop. Spermatids, products of meiosis II after the secondary spermatocytes undergo meiosis II, basically. Menstruation, day 0 to 14. It's the start of the follicular phase and the endometrium lining collapses. Day 14 is the LH spike and ovulation occurs. Day 14 and 28 is the luteal phase. A follicle. It's a multi-layer sac that nourishes and protects the unmature ova. Genes are linked, meaning they're on the same chromosome. So we have these seminal vesicles. Seminal vesicles, which secrete fructose to nourish the sperm, as well as alkaline products to protect the sperm from the acidic female reproductive tract. We also have the prostate gland, which secretes its alkali products to also protect the sperm from the acidic female reproductive tract. And then we also have the bulbourethral or Cowper's gland that's responsible for providing this clear viscous fluid that basically cleans out the urethra and any excess urine during sexual arousal. Ovulation. Ovulation is when you have the follicle. It begins to burst, secreting a secondary oocyte that travels to the one of the tracks, but it gets taken up by the fallopian tube. Or this is also when the follicle, as it grows bigger and bigger, it begins secreting estrogen, or what leads up to ovulation, that the follicle begins growing bigger, it secretes more estrogen. And at low concentration of estrogen, it inhibits a hypothalamic gland, but at high levels of estrogen, it causes a positive feedback on the hypothalamus gland, so it secretes lots of GnRH, which causes a spike in LH and FSH. And a spike in LH is what actually induces ovulation. In what 2 ways does LH affect the ovaries at sharp spike during menstruation? Causes ovulation. A sharp spike in LH during menstruation causes ovulation. After ovulation, LH stimulates a corpus luteum to secrete progesterone. What are examples of conceptual and behavioral schemas? Conceptual schema. What is a bird? What is a dog? Behavioral schemas. What do you normally do in a nice restaurant, etc.? Conceptual schemas. What is a bird? What is a dog? What do you do when someone asks your name? Oh, behavioral schemas like conceptual. What's a bird? Behavioral. What do you do when someone says thank you, etc.? Okay. What is the 5 most important thing that happens in prophase? Centrioles separate. Spindle fibers begin to form and go towards the center. Chromatin condenses to chromosomes, and nucleus starts to disintegrate. Synapsis is the pairing of chromosomes to form tetrads during meiosis 1. In prophase of meiosis 1. I got it. A eukaryotic chromosome contains histones. LH. So during menstruation, LH is what actually, a spike in LH is what actually induces ovulation. And after ovulation, this is where the LH can actually stimulate the corpus luteum to produce progesterone. Luteal phase, no idea. Oh god. After ovulation, LH will cause the birth follicle to form. Okay, so LH will actually cause the form of corpus to be progesterone. These branches levels rise to this. Okay, so luteal phase is after ovulation. LH causes the burst follicle to form into a corpus luteum, which secretes progesterone in response to LH. And as it continues secreting progesterone, estrogen stays high, and the progesterone will negatively inhibit the hypothalamus, causing its levels to go down for GnRH, FSH, and LH, because GnRH controls FSH and LH. Okay, kind of get it. What are examples of conceptual behavior? So conceptual schema is kind of like what's a bird, what's a dog. Behavioral schema is kind of like what do you do at a nice restaurant. What's like formality, etc. G2 phase, this is growth phase 2. Nothing really big happens. Mendel's second law of genetics. Only genes independently describe. I don't even know what this is saying, so I'm going to skip it. In what ways does LH affect the testes? Causes the interstitial cells, which are known as the Leydig cells, of the testes to produce testosterone. Nice. LH causes the interstitial cells, aka Leydig cells of the testes, to produce testosterone. What are two functional components of the testes? Seminiferous tubules and interstitial cells of Leydig. What are the two functional components of the testes? Seminiferous tubules and interstitial cells of Leydig. What happens in the luteal phase of menstruation? So in the luteal phase, this occurs right after ovulation. After ovulation and the follicle bursting once again, and the levels of LH will actually cause the burst follicle to form into a corpus luteum, which begins to secrete progesterone. And progesterone actually inhibits the hypothalamus. So because progesterone is inhibiting the hypothalamus, it causes there to be a decrease in GnRH, which leads to a decrease in LH and FSH. And this is all just to prevent the ovulation of multiple eggs. How does recombination unlink link genes? Double crossover. Is that what you're saying? Oh, okay. I see what that meant. It's kind of confusing. In what ways does LH LH causes the interstitial cells, or called the Leydig cells, to secrete a shit ton of testosterone? What are the two functional components of testes? We have the seminiferous tubules and the interstitial cells of Leydig. Acrosome is the head of the sperm, and it's derived from parts of the Golgi apparatus. It's used for penetration. What does it mean when schema is in equilibrium? Schema is in equilibrium when a schema is sufficiently capable of classifying new information. So schema is in equilibrium when the schema is sufficiently capable of classifying new information into itself. What occurs in ovulation? It can mean a crap ton of things. Basically, the main point of what happens in ovulation is that the follicle begins to burst and the secondary oocyte gets taken up by the fallopian tube. Oh, that was the other one. Okay. So, what occurs leading up... I should change this. What occurs leading up to ovulation? So, leading up to ovulation, we have the follicles growing, and they grow and grow and grow and secrete lots of estrogen and estrogen. And because there's lots of estrogen, it signals or secretes lots of luteinizing hormone. What am I doing? Wait, no, estrogen. The follicle growing releases estrogen. And as the follicles keep on growing, releasing estrogen, it causes the corpus luteum to begin to burst. No, it causes the follicle to begin to burst and release estrogen. Oof. Oh man, I'm confused now. Oh, yeah. Estrogen leads to increase in GnRH and spike in FSH and LH. That's where the spike came from. The spike in LH induces ovulation. And again, ovulation is when the follicles burst. Okay. A lot of information. What are the secondary sex characteristics? These are the characteristics that come from puberty. So you have an AB on a chromosome, big A, big B, little a, little b on other chromosome, and they separate just between that two regions. You can now get recombinant chromosomes. Means the schema is capable of integrating new information into itself without changes to the schema. Reductional division results in a division and reduction of ploidy number, basically diploid haploid. What are 5 steps of sperm development from stem cell to sperm? Oh, spermatogonium is the stem cell, primary spermatocyte, secondary spermatocyte, spermatid, and then we actually get the spermatozoa, which is the sperm itself. What does it mean to say genes are linked? They're on the same chromosome. What is a spermatid? Products of meiosis II, and they come after the secondary spermatocyte. Second law of classical genetics is law of independent assortment, basically saying linked genes are separable. Two alleles for a different gene. You receiving one allele does not affect you receiving another allele. What occurs leading up to ovulation? So as the follicle grows, it releases estrogen, and it gets to a point where estrogen actually begins to positively feedback on the hypothalamus, causing it to secrete lots of GnRH, which causes it to secrete lots of LH and FSH. And the spike in FSH begins to induce ovulation. Reduction division is division of a cell with a reduction in ploidy number, so haploid to haploid. 5 steps of sperm development. So we first have the spermatogonium, which is the stem cell. Then we have the primary spermatocyte, secondary spermatocyte, spermatid, and spermatozoa. Okay. Let's see here. What is menopause? No idea. It's a process by which a woman's ovaries become less sensitive to FSH and LH over time. Ovarian atrophy. makes pregnancy impossible. Between ages 44 and 55. Women's ovaries become less sensitive to FSH and LH over time. And this results in ovarian atrophy and makes pregnancy impossible. What is the second law of classical genetics? Law of independent assortment. The inheritance of one allele does not affect you in inheriting the other allele. What three tissues contribute to seminal fluid? What do they contribute? So we have the seminal vesicles, which secrete fructose to nourish the sperm, and alkali products to protect the sperm from the acidic female reproductive tract. We also have the prostate gland, which secretes alkaline product to protect the sperm cell from the female reproductive tract, which is acidic. Finally, we have the bulbourethral gland, or the Cowper's gland, which is used to secrete a viscous and clear fluid that cleans out the urethra and urine during sexual arousal. The four stages of meiosis is prophase, metaphase, anaphase, telophase. What does it mean to be diploid? Contains two sets of chromosomes, so 46 for us. What is androgen? Any male sex hormone such as testosterone. What three things does estrogen do in females? Secondary sex characteristics stimulates the development of the female reproductive tract and initial thinning of the endometrium in each month in preparation for the implantation of a zygote. Okay. Development of secondary sex characteristics, development of the female reproductive tract, and initial thickening of the endometrium in preparation for the implantation of a zygote. Menopause is when the woman's ovaries become less sensitive to FSH and LH over time, causes ovarian atrophy, and makes pregnancy impossible, typically between 44 to 55. LH affects the ovaries. So LH does two things. The first thing is that LH causes the luteinizing hormone to secrete progesterone, and the LH spike is what actually also induces ovulation. Okay. What is a tetrad? Tetrad is two homologous chromosomes connected to each other. Okay. Synapsis, formation of the tetrad pair, which is two homologous chromosomes, or prophase 1. Any male sex hormones, such as testosterone. In G2, the cell keeps on growing, producing proteins that are required for mitosis. Estrogen, secondary sex characteristics, production of the female reproductive tract. And estrogen, estrogens positively feedbacks at high levels with the hypothalamus to cause sharp increases in GnRH, LH, and FSH. Initial thickening of the endometrium each month in preparation. Conceptual schema. What's a dog? What's a cat? Behavioral schema. What do I do in a restaurant in a good setting with my girlfriend? Kinetochores are protein structures located at the centromere that serves as attachment points for the specific fibers of the spindle apparatuses. Protein structures located near the centromere that serves as attachment points for specific fibers of the spindle apparatuses. Protein structures located at the centromere. Protein structures located at the centromere that serves as attachment points for specific fibers of the spindle apparatus. Protein structures located at the centromere that serves as attachment point for spindle apparatus. Seminal fluid. Oh, so they all do it. Produced by seminal vesicles, prostate gland, bulbourethral gland, and nourishes and protects the sperm. I'm gonna take a break there. I did about let's see here. 87, 152 cards. Yeah. So it's about 50 minutes. We're gonna take a small break and we'll be back.